Before Bill and Ted, before Back to the Future, there was Willy McBean and his magic machine. Yeah, so, this was one of the earliest productions of Rankin. I think their third overall. Before this one, they did like their first production was this 2D animated adaptation of The Wizard of Oz, and their second production was, of course, Rudolph. So yeah, but this was their first theatrically released animated movie. And yes, as the intro may suggest, this is in fact a movie about time travel. So yeah, here's the story. The evil Rasputin von Rotten creates a, quote, magic machine. So yeah, it's not a time machine, it's a magic machine. I guess the magic is that it sends you back in time or whatever, but or forward, I guess. But yeah, I could have just called it a time machine. This is one of those cases where the word magic is just kind of thrown around, interchangeably, kind of like, in both Magic Boy and Alakazam the Great, you see the characters like learning martial arts, but they say they're learning magic, even though you don't really see much of them actually learning magic. But anyway, enough of that. So yeah, he invents this evil time machine so he can go back in time and basically one-up all the famous historical figures, and so that he'll be like all over the history books. But his pet monkey, his talking Mexican stereotype monkey, Pablo, escapes from his cage, and he steals his plans and his blueprints. So he, takes off with them, and then he eventually ends up in the house of our titular protagonist, Willy McBean. So yeah. Willy McBean is this young boy who's fascinated with science and all that stuff, but he hates history. But despite that, he seems to know a fair amount of history. So it's kind of a confusing setup there. But regardless, this is about him going back in time and learning to appreciate history more and all that. So yeah, Pablo comes into his house, he looks at the blueprints, and then, he decides to help Pablo stop the evil professor by making his own, quote, magic machine. By the way, the magic machine is kind of like this little watch that you hang around your neck or something. So yeah, he makes the machine, and then they travel back in time. First, they go back to the Old West. They see General Custer for honestly not much reason. They just kind of meet him just to show him getting killed off screen by the Native Americans. And then they travel a little further forward to, the West when, they meet Buffalo Bill, and, Professor Von Rotten's plan is to beat Buffalo Bill in a shootout, so he could become the greatest, the greatest gunman in the West. And yeah, he basically his plan fails. He tries to cheat by having this gun built into his hat, and then he also super glues Bill's gun into his holster. So yeah, But yeah, oh yeah, and Sitting Bull's there too. Surprisingly, not a very what's the word? Disgraceful. Or it's not like a super racist portrayal of Native Americans. In fact, he seems to be like Buffalo Bill is like this vain braggart. He's like obsessed with giving his autograph to people and stuff, and he's like, yeah, he's full of himself. But Sitting Bull's kind of like Sitting Bull basically calls himself his straight man. So yeah, and then at one point during the shootout, when the two guys are trying to shoot each other but fail, like they can't get their guns out, he's like, as much as I enjoy watching two white men shooting each other, it's while Von Rotten's trying to get away, and he's like, you need to honor this agreement, or I don't know the exact words, but yeah, it's kind of a badass moment for the Native American character, so yeah, points for that. Let's see, so yeah, Von Rotten fails, but he escapes just as Sitting Bull shoots an arrow in his butt. So yeah, they go back in time further to where they meet Christopher Columbus, and this isn't a very accurate portrayal. He's not like, they just had this somewhat not so racist portrayal of a Native American, so perhaps it was best they didn't show super racist Christopher Columbus. So yeah, basically they try to help Columbus sail to America, and and then Von Rotten disguises himself as a Chinese guy, like he's a Chinese trader, not with a D, not a T, although he is a traitor in his own right. And yeah, it's shows a bit of a Chinese stereotype there, but it's not the worst stereotype I've seen. There's like far worse Asian stereotypes in like old Looney Tunes cartoons and stuff. But yeah, it's so yeah, he disguises himself. Hold on a second. Or yeah, Columbus is trying to discover China, but yeah, he's sailing west to get there instead of east, so that he can avoid any kind of, any kind of scuffles with other ships, or at least that he knows of. But yeah, Von Rotten starts a mutiny. He tricks the other sailors to start a mutiny because he claims that Columbus is obviously crazy. So yeah, obviously he plans on discovering America instead of Columbus. So yeah, but then they manage to escape. And there's this pretty nice moment of that kind of subverts the whole why don't you just use the machine to get out of this, where Willy is locked up in a cell, and he points out that he could just use the magic machine to get out of there, but he says that he needs to he needs to stop Von Rotten, and he's got to save the monkey and set history right, if you will. So yeah, he successfully gets out, and they stop Von Rotten again, and then after that he goes back even further to to the Middle Ages, and they follow him. And yeah, he plans on pulling the sword out of the stone instead of King Arthur. So yeah. And yeah, King Arthur is this scrawny little wimp. So yeah, there's that. And then you got all the knights, Lancelot, etc. Merlin's there. And then Merlin gets this witch to trick Von Rotten, and she traps him in his suit or something, and he can't move. So yeah, Arthur pulls the sword out of the stone, and then there's a dragon. Arthur fights the dragon, and he can't really fight the dragon on his own, but the sword is powerful enough to stop the dragon, and yeah. And then they all go back even farther to ancient Egypt. Von Rotten's trying to build his own structures instead of the pyramids. Let's see, King Tut is this. Basically, he's another whiny, scrawny wimp. Although he does seem like a grown man, despite I'm pretty sure he died when he was a teenager. And yeah, Nefertiti is there, and she's this very materialistic prima donna. And yeah, basically what Von Rotten basically stops himself because his structures just fall apart, and yeah. So he's foiled. Yeah, he's foiled again, and yeah, they go back further still to the prehistoric era where cavemen happen to live with dinosaurs. That old anachronism. And yeah, Von Rotten's plan is to invent fire and the wheel. So he tries to show the cavemen how to make fire, but yeah, Willy and Pablo stop him again, and then there's a T-Rex that attacks, and then it eats Von Rotten's magic machine, and they stop the T-Rex, and then they also save Von Rotten from falling down a cliff. And then we get the trademark Rankin Bass, turning the evil villain good. So yeah, it's pretty standard, but at the same time, they don't do it to the insulting degree that they do it in most of their specials in later years. Yeah, in those specials, you can turn a villain evil just by threatening to take away something that they value or something like that. There's Frosty the Snowman and all that crap. But yeah, this one they actually pace it out a little better, and they make it slightly more believable. Slightly. So yeah, Willy lets Von Rotten use his magic machine. They all travel back to the present. And then they meet a bunch of people in town who look a lot like the historical figures they met over the course of their adventure. And Willy clearly recognizes them. He calls them by name. But I don't know, I guess it wasn't until now that he realized, oh, they look just like that historical figure I just met. So yeah. And then there's kind of this pointless scene where they're about to meet their teacher, and, I was like, oh, let me guess, it's Von Rotten, isn't it? And it turns out it's a teacher who has similar hair as Von Rotten, but then he brings Von Rotten in as a guest speaker or something, and Von Rotten shows him a movie, and at first they were like, oh, I knew we shouldn't have trusted that guy, but then, he's just showing them clips of all the historical places they went to. Kind of pointless. I could have just as easily just made him the teacher and had the same result, but whatever. So yeah, that's Willy McBean and his Magic Machine. It's kind of a silly movie. Let's see. You can tell they might have taken some inspiration from some slightly earlier works that involved time travel, like one was Mr. Peabody and Sherman. In fact, like a lot of the scenarios and historical figures, it seemed very inspired by Peabody and Sherman. So yeah, it seemed like something out of a Peabody and Sherman cartoon. Also, I noticed that Professor Von Rotten's design looks pretty similar to the first Doctor from Doctor Who, which was like a couple years before. So yeah, that's interesting. The characters aren't bad. Von Rotten definitely steals the show. He's got like this, gotta love his evil laugh. I can't quite replicate it, but yeah. Pablo the monkey, while slightly disrespectful to Mexicans, he's entertaining. I mean, those Mexicans liked Speedy Gonzales, so if they like Speedy Gonzales, I don't see what they'd have against the monkeys. So yeah. And yeah, there's some entertaining one-off characters as well. So yeah, they meet in the individual time periods. Willy McBean is alright. He's, I got nothing against his character. He's not even necessarily boring, but he's, like, not super interesting either. Let's see, the voice actors overall did a good job. You can tell a lot of them came straight out of Rudolph, because Willy McBean is voiced by Billy Mae Richards, who is the same lady who voiced Rudolph. And then, Pablo is also voiced by the same guy who voiced Hermie. So yeah, that's that together again, right? And then the guy who voiced Yukon Cornelius is actually the voice of Professor Von Rotten in this. Let me see, I also recognize the voice of, like, the Jack in the Box, Charlie in the Box, from the Dragon. Let's see. Oh, also, James Doohan, or however you pronounce it, Scotty from Star Trek, he's a voice actor in this. This was a year before Star Trek premiered, so yeah, that's an interesting part of the voice cast in here. The musical numbers weren't all that interesting. I mean, Rankin Bass can be pretty hit and miss with their musical numbers. There's a couple that I liked. Probably my favorite one in the whole movie was the song that Columbus and his sailors are singing, like, you gotta go west to go east. That was a fun song. I also kind of like the song between Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull. What else? Actually, so the animation is definitely standard choppy Rankin Bass. It's So yeah, it's what you'd expect from them, especially in their early years. But they do manage to like have these nice character like movements. They got these nice poses and stuff. So the animation may be choppy, but the characters are alive. There's also plenty of nice humor throughout. Yeah, I think there were some legitimately funny moments in this, which is kind of surprising. I don't usually consider Rankin Bass's works to be very complex or very well written. They're, a lot of them are very simple and, very kid friendly. I probably should watch more of the Rankin Bass stuff that I haven't watched before to get a better idea what their quality can be, but yeah. This was surprisingly impressive. What else? Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it's kind of funny after reviewing Rudolph's Shiny New Year just last December, there happened to be another Rankin Bass work before that involved time travel, and, once again, there's cavemen, and, hey, they even visit the years that Rudolph brings off that they visited off screen, like 1492 and ancient Egypt. So yeah, anything else? There's some entertaining stuff in this movie. It's definitely not like this masterpiece or anything. It's Rankin Bass. I don't think any of their works are like straight up masterpieces. But it's entertaining, and I think the characters are fun enough to get you through it. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I give it a 7 out of 10, and if you're a fan of Rankin Bass or anything involving time travel, yeah, definitely check this one out. And as usual, if there's anything I have to add, I'll be sure to put it in the comments, because there's quite a bit to talk about with this one, because I'm already over 20 minutes here. But yeah, I enjoyed this one. So yeah, Mash it and Smash It signing off.